Hello, my name is Phil Walker, Managing Director of EcoMerit. We at EcoMerit have been helping Irish businesses improve their sustainability and reduce their operating costs since we started back in 2009. My aim today is to share some of that experience with you and give you some hints and tips, maybe for companies who are at the start of their sustainability journey or even are just thinking about starting on their sustainability journey, and give you ideas of where to look and where some quick, easy savings are quite likely to be found. We'll be looking at energy, waste, water and transport. We'll also be looking at the importance of measurement and control, but I want to start by debunking the myth that being green is expensive. The easiest way to do that, I think, is by an example. And the example I've chosen is Dunamis Art Centre. They're a great little art centre in Portlaoise. They have a really good theatre, they have a gallery, they have a cafe, and they have achieved remarkable improvements since 2009, when we certainly started the journey with them. In that time, they've reduced their carbon emissions by over a half, they've reduced their water use by 2/3, their energy costs have come down by a third, that's 12,500 a year. They've done all this during a period when they've increased their activity, 100% increase in the number of performances they do each year. And they've also achieved, with our help, 4 SEI grants totaling €53,000 to help them make improvements. And I want to just guide you through this graph here, which shows you the money they have saved. So this is net savings that they have made over a 10-year period. So they started back in 2009, where I arrived and worked with them, worked with their technical manager. We walked around the site, we looked at their arrangements, we looked at the bills they were paying and so on, and we identified improvements. And they started off, as you would expect and as would make sense, with the very straightforward, quick, easy ones. So we found, for example, that a lot of areas, particularly in back of house, were overlit, so we removed excess light bulbs. They looked at their boiler timings and fine-tuned them a little bit, their heating controls and so on. And by doing these simple things, which cost them nothing, they started by saving a fair bit of money in the first year, about €3,000 just in the first year. They then invested in LED lights. Quite a big investment, and so for the only time during this period they actually went negative. So in 2011 they'd actually spent more money than they'd saved by a small amount. After that, the savings started coming from the improved LED lighting. They put in new doors after that. The doors they had were big glass doors with huge air gaps all around them, and in the winter they would just blow a gale straight into the reception area and into their cafe. So they replaced these with proper good fitting doors, which stopped the drafts and reduced their heating requirement. So savings improved and continued until they came to a major investment, which was new boilers. They replaced their old oil boiler with 2 new gas boilers. So a big spend there. Certainly took a hit out of their savings, but then again savings continued, and since then they've done other things, notably invested in stage lighting, LED stage lights. And again, so they're back weighing to credit. So over the piece, the point I want to make here is that they're now about €35,000 better off than if they'd just continued business as usual over the last 10 years. So as I say, being green, if you do it right, it actually saves you money rather than costs you money. So let's look at some of the areas where we would commonly find savings. So starting with energy. Your electricity contract. What tariff are you on? Are you on a 24-hour tariff or a day-night tariff? That can be important because it depends on what you're actually using. If, for example, you have a lot of overnight use, like maybe refrigeration, it would be of advantage to be on a day-night tariff because night rate electricity is about half the price of day rate. What is your maximum input capacity? A lot of people don't realise that you pay as a business not only for the electricity you're using, but for the capacity that is supplied to your site. And you pay for that whether you use it or not. So very often you can find you're actually paying for capacity that you don't need. I have an example of a company quite a few years ago now I visited. They had been in their premises about 7 years before I arrived and did the site assessment, and it turned out they had a much higher capacity than they were actually using. It was actually costing them €7,000 per year more than they needed. So by the time I arrived on the scene, they'd wasted €49,000 on absolutely nothing. The other thing to be careful of too is if your capacity is too low and you exceed that, then you get hit by punitive charges. So you want to be just on the right side of your capacity. Check also, are you still in contract? A lot of electricity companies have a habit of not telling you when you go out of contract, and they will just bump you up onto the standard rate, which means you're paying about 20% more for your electricity than you need to be. So check, are you in contract? If you're not, get back into contract and use that as an opportunity to shop around also. Another common one is insulation. Are your premises drafty? So it doesn't matter how much insulation is in there, if you've got a load of drafts around the place, they will lose a lot more heat and make the place much more uncomfortable. So seek these out, seal them. Heating and hot water pipes, are they insulated? If they're not, you'll have very large heat losses shipping hot water around your building and losing heat where you don't want it. And your loft area, how well is that insulated? Normal nowadays you'd expect to have 3mm, so it's about a foot thick of insulation in any loft space. If you've got less than that, it's very cheap and easy usually to install more, and it's very effective in reducing your energy costs. Sticking with energy, lighting. Nowadays, if you don't have LED lighting just about everywhere, you need to be asking yourself why. LED is much more efficient than any of the other older technologies. It's about 80% cheaper to run than most lighting solutions. So if you don't have LED lights in areas, especially areas which are lit a lot or for long hours, you should be looking at that. Also look at your lighting controls, sensors, timers, dimmers and so on can make a huge difference by switching lights off or dimming them when they're not needed, and again using much less energy. Refrigeration. In some cases, for example supermarkets, that can be about 70% of their total energy costs. So refrigeration is expensive, obviously, so if you don't need it, switch it off. You'll notice a lot of supermarkets nowadays are going more and more towards covered displays or displays with refrigerated displays with doors on them. That's because it saves a lot of energy. An open display, like a full height display like you see in the right hand picture there, if that's open, that's costing about €1,000 per year for each metre of display. So putting a closed door display in there would save about 55% of that cost. And at the very least, as in the case here, use night blinds so that at least when the place is closed, you're retaining some of the energy in the area there, instead of having it continually throwing out, or bringing in, I should say, heat and continually having to throw it out again. Likewise, if you have walk-in fridges which need to have the doors open because a lot of traffic in and out, put in plastic strips. That helps to retain the cold within the cold space, and again reduces heat loss. So moving on to water, one of my favourites are fill and flush urinals. So these are the traditional normal way that a urinal would be supplied. You'd have a cistern somewhere above the urinals with a ball cock valve in it. The cistern fills slowly, and then when it is full it flushes, and then it slowly fills again, and when it's full it flushes again, and it does that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, regardless of whether anyone is even in the building, far less using the urinals. So put in controls there. These 3 urinals you see here, they could be using as much as about €1,000 a year worth of water through just continually flushing. That can be hugely saved by putting in flush controls so that they're only flushing when it's actually needed. Old toilet cisterns are another favourite. If they're oversized tanks and full flush every time, that's a huge amount of water. Fit dual flush toilets or retrofit dual flush systems into them. Sticking with water, underground leaks, they can be incredibly expensive because they're underground. They're very hard to find. So do a leak test, do a regular leak test, ideally overnight. So if you have a 9 to 5 type premises, all you do is you switch off any background users like urinals last thing before you close up, take a meter reading, go back in first thing in the morning, take a reading again. The two readings should be identical. If they're not identical, you've got a leak or another unknown water user which you then want to investigate. Leaks can be very expensive if you're not aware of them, and as I say, if they're underground leaks you very rarely would be aware of them. As an example, a shopping centre I worked with some time ago, they had a very high level of water use, much higher than I would have expected for the number of premises that they had in the shopping centre, and it turned out they had multiple leaks all around the site, which was costing them about €17,000 per year. So, again, they fixed that. It cost, the payback time was less than a year, and they were saving $17,000 a year thereafter. And the only time they knew that they had a problem was when they did a leak test and discovered it. Another thing to look out for are leaky taps, fittings and ball cocks and so on. These all cost money. Do regular checks, do a walk around, use your ears. Again, maybe last thing at night, if you hear water running, think, well, why is that? Why is there water running in the building when there's nothing going on in the building? If so, then investigate. On to waste. Check your recycling performance. Usually you will get that from your waste contractor. So by weight, most businesses nowadays should be able to achieve about a 70% level of recycling. If you're not, remember that general waste is much more expensive. It's at least double the price of recycling waste. Therefore, it's costing you money by not segregating and recycling. Are your bins secure? I did an assessment a while back of a company, and they, all of a sudden, about 6 months previous to my visit, their waste costs suddenly doubled. Nobody had really noticed, they just kept paying the bills. And to cut a long story short, what happened was there used to be padlocks on their bins, the padlocks disappeared at some point, then all their neighbours started using their bins as a free disposal service, and they were picking up the tab for that, so their own waste costs had doubled. Are your bins full when they're lifted? If the bins are only half full, you're being charged for a lift each time, so therefore you're paying double what you need to for your waste. So make sure your bins are sized properly and lifted when they're actually full and not when they're half empty. And also make sure any hazardous waste is properly segregated. There's obviously legal and safety issues there. Moving on to transport. If you happen to have any vehicles due for replacement in the near future, please do not just automatically go out and buy another diesel. Look at the alternatives, particularly electric. Electric vehicles compared to diesel are about 80% cheaper to run. I know they're more expensive to buy in the first place, but if you have a vehicle that does quite a few miles, it doesn't take that long to pay back that difference. 80% cheaper to run. Carbon emissions are about 60% lower. There's no nasty diesel particulates, which we now know are extremely hazardous to health. There's tax incentives as well. You can write off €24,000 in year one of the purchase. And for company cars, there's zero benefit in kind for the driver. So a lot of reasons to go electric now. Electric cars have improved immensely over the last few years. They're continuing to improve. Range is improving and so on. So really, if you're looking at transport changes, please, please, please do not just go back for another diesel. Look at your options. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour through some of the main areas where you can find some readily achievable savings at low or no costs. I just want to spend a little time now talking about the importance of measurement and control. If you can measure your performance, so your energy, your waste and your water, you can then control it. If you're not measuring it, you don't have control. So this graph here shows a carbon footprint. In fact, it's my carbon footprint, my household. We are a home-based business, so it makes sense for us just to measure a combined footprint of the household and the business together. And you can see our totals. We've been measuring this back since 2008. And when we started off, we were about 26 tonnes a year was our energy carbon footprint, which is pretty colossal for a small household. I should explain, we were in an old 300-year-old cottage, which we still are. It had almost no insulation, single glazing, an old oil boiler. So everything really that you could do badly, we were doing it in the house that we were in. So you can see though, over the time, we have gradually chipped away at this, and we've changed from 26 tonnes right down in 2020 down to 6 tonnes. So we've reduced our carbon footprint by about 3/4. And okay, 2020 was a COVID year, so we weren't driving around as much. So in normal times, maybe that would be 8 tonnes, but that's still probably about a 2/3 reduction. And if you look at the breakdown of this, this is how it's happened. So home heating originally accounted for about half of our carbon footprint. And we've gradually worked away there. Over the years, we've gradually done up the house. We've re-roofed it, put in high insulation specs. We've put in triple glazing. We've stopped burning coal and peat in our open fires. We then changed from our old oil boiler to a modern gas boiler. And all these things have had a cumulative effect to bring down our heating footprint massively. Electricity. The grid itself has improved over time, so that's helped. But also we've changed out our lighting to LED. Anytime we buy a new appliance, like a fridge or something like that, we make sure it's an energy efficient one. And so that's helped us steadily reduce our electricity footprint. Here though is our cars. This went steadily up and up over the first few years because the business was getting busier, we were driving more and more miles, we were burning more and more diesel. In actual fact, the increases in our transport here were pretty much wiping out all the improvements we were making on electricity and heating. That changed quite suddenly here when we bought our first electric car, and then the second time when we bought our second electric car. So we had 2 diesels, we now have 2 electrics. And here now is our footprint compared to up here. This one here is flights, which is mostly family holidays, so that kind of jumps around a bit year on year. Sometimes it's nothing, sometimes it's 2 or 3 tonnes. So, but the overall effect, by monitoring and using our carbon footprint as a measure, you can see what has been achieved. And this is the sort of results that can be achieved. Again, just steadily over time. We didn't do anything too radical at any one time. We just chipped away at it, looked at the next thing to do. And that's the results that you can get. Also in measurement and control, maybe consider an environmental certification, such as Eco-Merit. Environmental certifications can be very useful. They provide discipline in the first place because they make sure that you're actually measuring and controlling. They make sure that you have improvement plans in place, and somebody is coming and sitting down with you each year and reviewing your progress and seeing what more can be done and so on. There's also PR and marketing benefits. So you can, obviously, if your customers are interested in your environmental performance, having an environmental certification is a great way to demonstrate that, and being able to measure and show your carbon footprint, for instance, also is as well. And you've got access to expertise, and also, certainly in the case of Eco-Merit, is a proven route to grant support from SEI, such as was achieved by Dunamis, where we started off at the beginning. So look, thank you very much for your attention. I'll just leave you with this graph here, which I think is an interesting one. This shows the carbon footprint of Ireland over the last 10 years or so, and you can see it's just bumped along and changed very little. Together with that, you can also see the carbon footprint of the Eco-Merit community, and you can see that that has steadily dropped over the same period. So again, all these companies in our community that we're serving and supporting over the years, they're all making the same kind of changes, steadily working away at it the same way as Dunamis Art Centre, and this is what they've achieved. So again, from your own point of view as a business, where do you want to be? Do you want to be where Ireland has been and we now desperately need to change? Or do you want to be in a situation where you can show real improvement and demonstrate that improvement to yourselves, to your staff, to your customers, to your other stakeholders? Thank you very much for your time.